Shalom Aleichem. My name is Rabbi Adam Dubin. So rather than focus on uh, the Torah reading for Shemini Atzeret or Simchas Torah, I thought to focus on the Haftarah. So looking at the time frame, when the Haftarah took place, it was in one of the greatest moments perhaps in all of Jewish history. Almost 5 centuries had passed since the birth of the Bnei Yisrael as a nation from Yetziat Mitzrayim. Since their arrival into the land of Eretz Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael had lived in respective tribal territories with almost no central infrastructure to unite them as a people. With the appointment of Shaul HaMelech and later with David HaMelech, the Yidden had now had a united kingdom equal to that of other neighbors. Spiritually, however, there was still no focal point. True, there was a Mishkan in Shiloh, later a Nov and a Givoim, but this was still a temporary situation. The Avodah was still allowed to occur anywhere on Bamos. Due to a lack of a permanence of the Mishkan, David HaMelech had eventually transferred the Aron Kodesh to Yerushalayim, but it was essentially in transit without a permanent residence. Even politically, there was not much rest in the country during the reign of David HaMelech. David was constantly fighting with Bnei Yisrael's various enemies, which indeed was the reason why Hashem didn't allow him to actually build the Beis HaMikdash. Now, for the first time in history, everything was coming together. Bnei Yisrael were united politically as one nation under Shlomo HaMelech, who was, as we know, the successor to David HaMelech's throne, and he had now led them in the project of building the Beis HaMikdash. Eretz Yisrael was dwelling, or the Bnei Yisrael were dwelling peacefully in Eretz Yisrael, with many of their enemies now subservient to them. And as a result of all this, the people were living in great prosperity and economic comfort. In many ways, this time has been considered to be the zenith of Jewish history. The story of the Haftarah is that of the dedication of Bayis Rishon. The celebration began 7 days before Sukkot and continued with the following 7-day celebration of Sukkot. As an immense crowd gathered from the entire country to behold the awesome sights and to join in the festivities. The height of celebration was in the Aron Kodesh was brought into the Mishkan, or into the Heichel by the Kohanim. The Melech addressed the people, and then, while kneeling in front of the Mizbeach, offered a lengthy and moving tefillah on behalf of the people. Upon finishing, he once again turned toward the huge crowd and was gebenched him, "Blessed be Hashem, who has given rest to his people Israel." He continued on in bestowing brachas for the fulfillment of his earlier tefillahs to Hashem, and for the people to always remain faithful. In this way, the entire world would know that there was no other being who controlled Shemayim v'Aretz. And in many Sidurim, some of these psukim from Shlomo Melech's tefillah are said each day as part of Shachris. This psukim then describe the huge numbers of cattle and sheep that were brought as karbanos for Thanksgiving by Shlomo HaMelech himself, 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. The sheer volume of karbanos far exceeded the capacity for the Mizbeach, the Beis HaMikdash. So to this end, Shlomo HaMelech gave a legal sanctity for the entire Beis HaMikdash courtyard to be halachically allowed to serve to be karbanos, to be brought in the entire vicinity in the open space. And this explanation is given by Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi counters that the pasuk means that the original Mishkan altar was much smaller, was replaced by the stone Mizbeach that took up a lot more floor space. It was 28 cubits square, approximately 60 feet, and which was indeed large enough to handle all these volume of karbanos. Look, see the Gemara Maseches Zvachim in Daf Nun Tes, and then see Rashi there. So passed 14 days of celebration from Shemini Atzeret, the last day of the festival. The king appeared for the people to bid them farewell, and he blessed the people blessed the king, and then the next day began a journey home with rejoicing and delighted heart. The incredible volume of korbanos, as we mentioned a moment ago, in this massive celebration truly reflects the feeling of exuberance felt by the king and the people at the time. The Midrash teaches us a parable of a king who was traveling on the road. He came to an inn at the roadside and was served the kind of meal that was available at his halfway house. And the king wasn't impressed. Is this how you conduct yourself with me? Am I not the king? He demanded. People responded, our master, our king, we are on the road and we gave you a meal in accordance with the travel and the inn that we came to. Wait till we arrive in the city you enter in your palace and you'll see the honor that we give you. See the Yalkut Shimoni and Malachim over here. In a similar way, the reality of the dedication was that Kadosh Baruch Hu had finally come to his permanent resting place here on earth. Everything before this, starting with the Mishkan and the Midbar, had been transient, on the road. Shlomo HaMelech expressed the sentiment of simcha with this kind of massive offering that far outdid the volume of korbanos that had been brought before. An ironic thing about all this can be found in the Pasuk in the Haftarah, in the description of their farewell to the Melech. The Pasuk says, and they went home in their tents. Now we must remember, this was over 4 centuries after entry into Eretz Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael most certainly had permanent homes at the time. Why use the term tents? So an explanation goes like this. After their experience in the Beis HaMikdash, where Hashem's Kedusha was seen and felt in a real way, every Jew came out with a firm conviction and feeling that physicality and materialism cannot really be called a home. The prosperous economic life that the Bnei Yisrael enjoyed at this time was now indeed felt to be a temporary tent. To illustrate this point, Chassidim tell a story of the Maggid of Mezrich. At the time of the story, the Maggid was still a student of the Baal Shem Tov, and he worked as a teacher, as a malamed, a teacher of young children, and he did so for no pay, living only on the meager income that his wife had made. He'd eventually actually been offered a position to be a Rav in a number of prominent communities, but he refused them all. Once a Jew came to town searching for the great Maggid of Mezrich, and he had regards from him from the Baal Shem Tov. Though he didn't know the Maggid personally, he was sure that this must be some great famous personality, as the Baal Shem Tov had referred to the Maggid of Mezrich with such an incredible level of admiration and honor. To his surprise, it took him a long time till he could identify the whereabouts of Reb Ber Melamed, the children's teacher. He was directly to the outskirts of the town where the Maggid of Mezrich lived and studied with his children. Coming close to the house, he began to realize the kind of poverty that the Maggid lived in. Walking in, he saw his teaching table made of a few planks of wood, while the children sat on a bench also consisting of a wooden plank. In short, the entire scene was the kind of poverty that aroused deep pity to the visitor. Looking at the teacher who sat with the group of children at his beautifully shining and radiant face, the visitor understood that this man was the man he was looking for. After welcoming the guest, the Maggid asked him if he would not mind returning a little later, as he was in the middle of learning with the children. The guest obliged and returned later that evening. This time he found no table, as the boards were converted into beds for the Maggid's own children to sleep on. After the guest conveyed the regards from the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid pleaded with him to stay a little so he could give due honor to such a guest. In conversation, the guest expressed his pain over the dire living conditions of his illustrious host. I am far from rich, said the guest, but if you come home to my home, you'll find, Baruch Hashem, a chair, a bench, some beds for the children, and other furniture. The Maggid said to him, "You describe a wonderful situation. May I then ask you, do you have all of your furniture and home decor with you now?" The guest responded, "Rebbe, I'm traveling, and on the road one makes do with what there is. When I return from my journey, I will enjoy all that I have in my house." "Yes," said the Maggid, "while in transit, we make do with what there is. At home, this is where we must ensure we are comfortable. At home is where one needs everything." The guest now understood. The last pasuk in the Haftorah ends with the Bnei Yisrael returning home, joyously delighted of heart for the goodness that Hashem had performed for David, his Eved, into the Bnei Yisrael. The Gemara picks up on an obvious question relating to the phrase, what good has Hashem performed at this time for David, his Eved, David, his servant? Gemara answers, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, when Shlomo HaMelech wanted to bring the Aron Kodesh into the Kodesh Kodashim, the gates of the sanctuary, the Beis Hamikdash, stuck to one another, making it impossible for him to enter. Shlomo HaMelech uttered the 24 forms of song to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but was not answered. He opened the declaration and said, "Gates, lift your heads," but he wasn't answered. He then said, "O Lord, Kadosh Baruch Hu, do not turn your back to the face of your anointed one. Remember the kind of deeds of David, your servant," says in the Mishlei. No sooner had he said this, the gates opened. At that moment, the faces of David HaMelech's enemies were blackened from shame like the bottom of a pot. The entire Bnei Yisrael knew that Hashem had forgiven David HaMelech for the Avera involving Bathsheba, as you see in the Gemara Maseches Moed Katan, Daf Testament Aleph. That's the Haftorah. What can we learn from this and take into our time right now? As we are currently still in the midst of a global pandemic, we're very much uncertain. We're very much in transit. We'd like to be able to return home to the normalcy, at least of our lives that we're accustomed to. To that end, Baruch Hashem, in many communities throughout the world, we've been able to come back to shul. We're able to go back to daven. With a minyan, maybe it's outdoors. Maybe it's not the full crowd if you're indoors. But we're able to come back to some sort of normalcy. But we recognize that while it's some sort of normalcy, it's not normal, it's not the way it should be. We're still in transit. We haven't made it back. And who knows when we're really going to make it back to the way things were, and maybe they never will be back to the way that they were. God willing, we'll take the message from the Maggid of Mezrich, take the message from Shlomo HaMelech, that really we're not home. And we won't be home until we have our return to Eretz Yisrael, not just physically making Aliyah, as many people have done, but really making Eretz Yisrael whole, bringing back the Beis Hamikdash, and that could only be done with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And I'll say that there have been many people since the beginning of the virus spreading who have made statements that, Mashiach has to come this year because look at what's going on. I can't say that. I daven, as I think we all daven, that Mashiach should come every day, but I sincerely hope that our tefillahs that we daven on Rosh Hashanah, that we daven with on Yom Kippur, that we daven with on Sukkot and every other day leading up to the Shemini Atzeret, that really Hashem takes another look, so to speak, at the world. It says it's time to let the Bnei Yisrael come home. It's time to end this transience that we are all in by bringing the Beis Hamikdash, by bringing Mashiach Tzidkeinu, so we can all go home to the Beis Hamikdash, I should say. And that will end not only the virus, but as my 5-year-old said, what's the best way, the easiest way to end this Magefa that we're in? Mashiach should come. It's an easy answer from a 5-year-old. Hashem should see fit to make it happen, and there will no longer be not only in uncertain terms and uncertain places because of where we are holding with the virus and life in general, but we'll all be home, the home that Hashem wants us to all be in. That is, of course, Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach Tzidkeinu, the Beis Hamikdash, performing the avodah the way it's supposed to be done, doing things the way they're supposed to be. May it be speedily in our days. Wish everyone a good Shabbos, a good Yom Tov.